Hello, I'm John Robertson and I'm a South Australian and I'm living here in England. And the first thing I want to say is that I'm supporting Peter Lewis's call for a Royal Commission. Now, I've got my own knowledge of the law system in South Australia and I certainly want to be a witness at this Royal Commission. So I'd like to in fact, I'll send one of these DVDs to all the members of Parliament and I'll tell you a little more later. Okay, well in my case, there's a situation where one of the government employees lied as she gave evidence before a magistrate. And I looked into that and had the police looking into it, and they wanted to, that's the police, wanted to charge this lady, but Paul Rofe refused to prosecute her for perjury. Now there's been a cover-up on that ever since.
It is the follow-up punch in South Australian Speaker Peter Lewis's call for a Royal Commission.
I want these allegations to be properly examined and the truth to be determined.
Now with this Royal Commission that Speaker Peter Lewis is calling for, there's a lot of really terrible things have happened in South Australia as far as the law is concerned, and it needs to be shown up. Now, I know something about young David Zack, and he was supposed to have murdered Derrance Stevenson, and Mannix said that he could put a time to the death in it.
The health of our justice system. It's the least tangible but possibly the most defining test of a fair society. Under the microscope is the work of the former chief of the South Australian Forensic Centre, responsible for crucial evidence in a string of major criminal investigations. Incredibly, the head man, Dr. Colin Manock, lacked the proper qualifications for the job, and although authorities knew of his shortcomings, little was done to guard against critical errors being made. And senior doctors and lawyers now say errors were made in many cases.
It's a system that tolerates incompetence and turns a blind eye to errors and injustice, at times sending innocent people to jail while allowing the true villains to escape punishment. Dr. Colin Manock, the prosecution's expert witness, and startling evidence which challenges almost everything that Manock told the court.
The evidence given by Dr. Manock in the Keogh case was wrong, and in lots of other cases was wrong.
Dr. Colin Manock was the state's Director of Forensic Pathology for almost 30 years, but amazingly, he never had any qualifications in the crucial field of histopathology.
So he hadn't done the training, but they gave him the gig?
He was given the job, and then there were some notes in one of the earlier proceedings where they said, we knew we were taking a bit of a risk because we were appointing somebody without proper qualifications. But it was our view that he would get the qualifications after he was appointed.
Then there was the case of lawyer Derrance Stevenson, who was found dead in a freezer at his home on Greenhill Road. David Zack was charged with shooting Stevenson and putting him in a freezer.
His body was bent round into a sort of fetal position, and we know that his body had been in the freezer for some considerable period of time.
Manock claimed he could work out how long the body had been in the freezer by using a special scientific formula. Again, the time of death was key, because the police needed to know whether Zack was at Stevenson's house around the time of the murder.
Dr. Manock thought that he could take the formula that was developed in those experiments and apply them in this particular case to try and estimate the time at which the murder had taken place. This was a complete misapplication of the science involved.
The scientists who conducted the experiments were careful to point out that the theory only worked if the bodies were flat. But Stevenson's body was bent over, so Dr. Manock took it upon himself to adjust the formula.
He had to adjust the formula, as he said, by 40%, because the body had been bent round rather than being frozen in a sort of prone position.
And where did he get the figure of 40%?
He made it up.
Despite that, David Zack was convicted of murder.
Now, that's one story, but I know another story. I've read transcript to show that some other young fellow went to the law in a very agitated mood early one morning and wanted to see a lawyer. He wanted to see O'Halloran because he had seen something that night. But it was early in the morning And they said, go away and come back a bit later on. Well, that young fellow never ever did come back, and I think it was Alan Barnes who was murdered a couple of weeks later. And this was in the transcript, but it wasn't shown to the jury. Now that's the sort of thing that I think has to be investigated, because young Zach was in jail for, I don't know, a dozen years or so, and I don't think anybody thinks he ever killed Stevenson. So that's just one thing I happen to know something about. What I want is to stop complaining to the South Australian Parliament how rotten they are, and I want to just say, well, let's put that behind us. I want some options on this land at Port Augusta so I can get on with an Opal Lands waterway. So I'm not trying to be difficult with the Parliament. I do want to see the law fixed up, but let's get on with some positive things. The industry's going out of South Australia. Mitsubishi and all the rest of them are moving out, and I'd like to put some industry in, and that would start with some tourism and some wind farms and a few other things. Well, in the facts, I'll just read one piece. This is the only part I'm going to read tonight, because I'm offering a deal to Premier Mike Rann. Provided I can give evidence to a Royal Commission on South Australia's legal system, as suggested by Peter Lewis, I will drop all of my potential claims against the South Australian Government. Now this offer expires on June the 1st this year. Now, I consider that South Australia has been so corrupt over the last 30 years that the real reason that Premier Rann won't have a Royal Commission is that South Australia couldn't afford to pay the damages. You only have to look at Keogh. He's been locked up for perhaps 10 years by now. It's getting close. And they've got scores of people that have been locked up improperly. And the damages that would be owing to these people, if a Royal Commission showed up what really happened because of the Manic affair, and that's not the only rotten thing that's happening down there, that once it all comes out, the state couldn't afford the bill. And that's why Rann will not have a Royal Commission.
I wouldn't think, however, a Royal Commission would be the way to go. Royal Commission simply costs money.
Do you think the government and the Premier are scared of what they might find if they do go looking?
I think if I was in their situation, I would be. The real fear on the part of the government is because they've fixed all their budgets up for the next year or two, and this sort of thing, which is unexpected, might upset the apple cart a bit.
Now there's an unnamed coroner mentioned by Bob Miles. They haven't named him, but it's Chevelle, Wayne Chevelle. He's the coroner of South Australia, and I know Wayne Chevelle. I know a lot of these people down there, and Wayne Chevelle should be locked up himself for 25 years. Chevelle sat on that report that said Mannix was a bad expert. Now you'll hear all about it on the information that came in from South Australia. And Chevelle didn't think of Keogh, he just thought of his mates, his mate Rofe and his other mates that are trying to push Keogh into jail. So he sat on his report until after Keogh was found guilty. You'll hear all about it. Now that stinks. They knew that Manic wasn't up to the job. They knew that he was unqualified, not able to do what he was supposed to be doing, and yet Chevelle just sat tight and let it all happen. As soon as Keogh was jailed for 25 years, he came out with his report on the babies, and in that report it said that Manic was a bad expert. Not a bad expert, a hopeless expert. And this is why South Australia would owe a fortune to all the people that have been wrongly jailed. Now I know Chevelle because Chevelle was involved in the case that I was in, and he was a magistrate. And when this was cooked up, I was in touch with a very good QC in Sydney, and he wanted to know what it was all about. And I said, I don't know what it's all about. I can't work out what it's all about. And then Ian Ward, the QC in Sydney, said to me, "You're going to lose this. You don't know what you're doing." And I said, "I know I don't know what I'm doing." And he said, "Well, I'll write out some subpoenas for you, and you get all this information, and then you'll have a fair chance." And Ward drafted out the subpoenas, and I lodged them, and it was to get out the documents I needed from the tax department and the grants board. So these subpoenas were served, and the day came along, and Robert Simmons, Semo, and I were in the dock, and Semo said, "Stick it up 'em, Robbo," and I hope I will one day. Now with Chevelle, Telfer, who was appearing for the government, gave a very good case to say that this was an exporting matter, it was controlled by the Australian government, the federal government, and it was not a state matter, and under those circumstances the tax department and the grants board would not release the documents I wanted for my defence. Now, I'd already been told by Ward, you've got to get the documents or you can't win. And of course I had to have the documents. I needed the documents that we'd put to the grants board and the tax department to show that we'd done everything right. And Telfer said, "You can't have them." And he explained why. And Wayne Chevelle heard all of this and then found for Telfer, which meant I could not get my documents. Therefore, there was no way I could defend myself. Now, in ordinary human rights law, you have to be able to get the evidence you need. And I was absolutely prohibited from this. If there was any case at all, it was a federal matter. It was not a state matter, and yet Chevelle went ahead with this case. He should have thrown it out on the spot. Now, Michael David, he's now a judge, he was a QC then, was appearing for Semo. And we went aside for a little while, and Michael David said to me, "They haven't got a case, we don't know what they're talking about. And you go away, John, and I'll fight this out for Semo on his own. We'll split the case and we'll argue it on the law." And I said, "Well, that's fine with me. I don't know what they're talking about and I can't get my documents." So that's what happened. Michael David, then lost in front of Chevelle. And he said he's mad. That's what David said. Oh, he mightn't have used those words. But they appealed. And then Judge Boland, agreed with Michael David. And then they appealed again. And it went back again, and this time Judge O'Loughlin reversed it again, which meant that in the end Semo lost. Now, at all times, it was an unfair hearing. It never was a fair hearing. And in due course, this has to be thrashed out, because there was never a case, and I'll explain more about that later. But as far as Chevelle is concerned, he just follows the government line. He is not a fair man. He's not fit for his job. Now, Semo has since told me that he's done fine work as a coroner. And Semo has told me that he did a very good job on the plane crash that was near Whyalla. So I won't say that all's wrong with Chevelle, but as far as what he did to Keogh, I think he should be thrown into jail for 25 years, because that's what Keogh got. And he wouldn't have been jailed if the jury knew what was in Chevelle's report. I want to talk about Magistrate Liddy. Now, fortunately, I don't know that man, because he's one of the pedophiles. But we can see that he was a pedophile preying on the kids for 30 years while he was a magistrate. Now, I won't tell you about it because you get it off the other part of the DVD. But I'll go back 30 years, because I was at an old scholars dinner in Adelaide, and Harold Salisbury, who was the police commissioner, he'd been recruited from Scotland Yard, was the main speaker. And I heard Harold Salisbury say that there were forces of darkness in South Australia And he went on about it and explained that he was very concerned.
We find that proper photographs aren't taken either at the scene or at autopsy. We find that clothing goes missing and the medical files go missing. And yet, when all of this comes before a judicial tribunal, such as a coroner's court or the magistrate's court or the trial court, instead of finding searching questions to say, well, why didn't this happen properly, it all just passes through as if that were normal and acceptable procedures.
For example, Magistrate Peter Liddy was able to use his office to prey on children for almost 30 years. He even used public facilities such as jails and courthouses as venues for his abuse.
To my understanding, there wasn't any knowledge of Mr. Liddy's use of facilities.
Well, I think there was. I mean, some of the kids were fingerprinted before they were taken into the cells.
By Liddy?
Yes, well, with the aid of pretending police officers.
Yes, I don't know those details.
In fact, the judge, prosecutors, Liddy's defence lawyers and police all visited the locations during that trial. But this point doesn't appear to have been taken up by authorities.
It's quite clear that Salisbury was onto the family-type sex crimes of South Australia, and that's what he was referring to with his forces of darkness. Now, it wasn't long before Don Dunstan, the Premier, got Michael White, an acting Supreme Court judge, to go through police records with the purpose of dumping Salisbury. Now, I know Michael White very well, and he's the lowest of the low as far as I'm concerned. He became a Supreme Court judge, and I've played tennis with him. And I actually objected to Michael White hearing my case, because eventually I went to a different magistrate, a man called Peter Kelly, and he was a buffoon if ever there is one. I'll just say something about Kelly. Kelly said I gave evidence, and then in another part of his summing up he said I didn't give evidence. And that's how stupid he is. He didn't know whether I gave evidence, whether or not I gave evidence. Now, at that time, White, well, I appealed, of course, but your appeal isn't a rehearing. They go by whatever the magistrate says. It's a really criminal thing put on by the South Australian Parliament that they've got a system down there where you've got no chance. I knew I had no chance because you can't put fresh evidence before a judge. Anyway, I knew White was a crook because I knew a bit about him, and I'd actually taken some action against him. And I objected to White hearing my case, and White insisted on hearing my case. So I know a lot about White. Anyway, in the early days, Stuart Coburn, who's referred to by Michael Abbott, QC, and you'll see a bit about Michael in the other part of the DVD. He referred to Stuart Coburn, and Stuart Coburn wrote something into the Advertiser that interested me, and I went to see Stuart. So I had a good chat to Stuart Coburn, and Stuart Coburn said to me that Michael White's not up to the job. He said he hasn't got hasn't got the intelligence for it. Now, Michael White had served in the RAF, or RAAF I should say, and good credit to him. And he was a student of law, and he worked his way through, and he's one of those grinders that make their way, and good credit to them for doing it. But he hasn't got the intelligence for the job and the capability. Now, Dunstan picked this man out to do his report, and Michael White said, I know these people, because he was looking at the reports that the police had on suspect citizens of South Australia. Now, no doubt there were a lot of people in those records that were quite innocent, and something had happened and the police took notice of them. There's no doubt about that. But White said, I know these people, I know these people, I know these people. Well, I dare say he did. And I have no doubt at all that Liddy was one of those that was named in the police records and the police were onto him. But Michael White said how rotten it all was, and he had the records destroyed, and he was very proud of doing it. And then Dunstan managed to get rid of Salisbury.
Michael, when we asked the President of the Law Society to respond to our story on Paul Rofe, they deputised you for the job. Have you got sharper teeth?
It's not a question of sharper teeth. Your program went much further than mere criticism of Mr. Rofe's work practices. I mean, firstly, I think you owe Mr. Rofe an apology.
On what score?
Well, in view of what you said, I mean, now's your opportunity to apologise.
Michael Abbott QC is one of Adelaide's most prominent criminal barristers and one of the most vocal critics.
I take it you will apologise to him for what you said to him?
Well, I don't think there's any need to apologise. Paul Rofe himself said that he'd done the wrong thing.
Your program linked his work practices to what you perceive to be miscarriages of justice and defects in the judicial system. And it's what you said, so far as the Law Society is concerned, about the judicial system that I think demands a response.
First things first, to his credit, Paul Rofe didn't shy away from his image of gambling at work as being a matter of legitimate public interest when interviewed on ABC Radio this morning.
Although you may feel that the public perception is distorted because it doesn't take into account your after-hours work, do you agree that there is a public interest issue here?
Yes, I do.
We don't have trial by media, we have trial by courts.
But when the courts aren't operating correctly, in specific cases, then surely it's the right of the media to issue a debate about that.
Well, you arrogate that right to yourself. I mean, I don't accept that you have got a right to assert that the courts aren't operating correctly.
But you don't know, Michael, exactly the cases I'm talking about.
Well, of course I don't.
So you're just simply making a sweeping statement.
I suggest that you don't either. And I mean, you might have done some research.
Is that not the height of arrogance?
No. I'm just...
Is that not the height of arrogance to suggest that I don't know what I'm talking about, when in fact you've admitted you don't know what I'm talking about?
Well, look, you can debate it that way if you like. You can have program after program on Liddy's case or Keogh's case. I don't care. You can also raise, as a matter of legitimate public interest, concerns that you might have about any officer who holds any public office. But what you've done in your program is to link what you perceive to be miscarriages of justice with the fact that, as you assert, Paul Rofe doesn't put in 24 hours a day or put in all the hours between 9 and 5.
But how can you challenge any case without also bringing into question the action of the prosecution and the courts? And one would expect Michael Abbott to be a bit more tolerant of an investigative media, given he represented Edward Splatt in the Splatt Royal Commission in 1983, which overturned a murder conviction based on flawed forensic evidence.
And that Royal Commission did not occur because the system worked properly. It occurred because the system failed. And it also occurred because the media ran a campaign to say that there had been an injustice. Now, what I'm saying to you is, here's a challenge. Why not look at the Keogh case? Do you think we would bother to go to this length?
Well, I don't know what motivates you, but I know that you're not in Stuart Coburn's league.
Thanks for the reference. I'm just simply sitting here saying to you that there is substantial questions that need answering. Now, would you be prepared to look at the case?
And there are other QCs who, at least historically, acknowledge the crucial role of the media when the court systems fail. In this case, the media's champion is Mari Shaw QC, delivering a speech on behalf of Adelaide's criminal lawyers.
Mr Splatt was convicted, but a journalist named Stuart Coburn came to read his correspondence and came to believe in his innocence. He set about publicising the imperfections of the prosecution's case, using the media to expose the unfairness that had occurred during the trial. I have no doubt that but for Mr Coburn, Mr Splatt would still be in jail.
But of course that was then, and this is now. And the Society's members aren't so generous in advance. But perhaps that's to be expected.
There are lots of things that irk us in the society in which we live, but they're the rules by which we live.
I'm accountable to the public.
Dunstan is now dead, but Mike Rann was his press secretary, and he is now the present Premier. And he's the one that forced Peter Lewis to resign yesterday. The Law Society covers up for each other. I took a case to the Law Society because, I'm jumping ahead now, but Simon Lane started this whole event that went before Chevelle, and then went to Kelly, and then went to Michael White. And Simon Lane was told to get Robertson. I was causing too much trouble because, having gone to the law library for a couple of years, and knowing a bit about the law and respecting the law, I thought, oh, well, I can do this. So I started to take some actions on it. And I won a few too. But I can see that they didn't want me to keep going. And Simon Lane was told to get Robertson. Now, he didn't choose to get after me. He was told to get after me. Now, I don't know who told him, but I know he was told, because that's the information that's come to me. And this is why I want a Royal Commission. This stuff that's going on in South Australia is beyond the pale.
His former lawyer, Lyndon Fairclough, in 1994, he was the subject of a fraud inquiry headed up by Anna Jane Cheney in her role as the Acting Director of Professional Conduct and Practice with the Law Society. However, on the day she died, she and members of the fraud squad faced the embarrassment of returning Fairclough's files after seizing them illegally.
I'm going to go back to Liddy, the pedophile. Now, I happen to know Derrance Stevenson, that was murdered. And I know Zach, who was jailed for his murder. I happened to work on the same floor as Derrance Stevenson. I didn't know him personally. I just used to pass him on the staircase when he walked up and down to the first floor. And so I followed his name. I met David Zach, and David Zach showed me a transcript.
I did. I started listening about the bus.
Yeah, well, we used to pass on the staircase, but I met Zach. Zach showed me the transcript, and the important thing that I've seen is that Manic